Hey there, welcome to another episode of Gimme Empathy. I'm your host, Scott Mercer. If you listened to the last episode with Megan McEwen that had no intro, I'm back doing intros. For the time being, this episode will definitely require a lot of context. So about 5 years ago, a long time before this podcast was around, I was going to start another podcast called Only Talking Sense, where I'd talk to people in the local Brisbane music scene and find out how they got to where they got. It was going to be a bit of an oral history project. I recorded a few things for that podcast, but I never really got off the ground. If you've heard the Gimme Empathy episodes with Cam Smith or Patience Hodgson and John Patterson, you'll know what the deal is. But this episode was recorded in May 2013 with Ian Rogers, Dr. Ian Rogers, Dr. Indie Rock. Now, Ian played bass for a band called Iron On, a band very important to me musically. They were around from about 2002 to 2008. The thing is, I never actually saw Iron On. I didn't even know who they were until they'd already been broken up for a little while. I got into them through another band called Ann Horse, which Kate Cooper, who was one of the singers in Iron On, later went on to start. Now, when I say Iron On was important to me, I was really quite obsessed with this band and Ann Horse. I went through all their old material. The other singer, Ross Hope, had a new project called Disco Nap, and I'd go see his shows and got him to sell me some old Iron On shirts he's still under his house. And he even gave me a then unreleased CDR of Iron On demos. I remember one time I spent a Friday night looking at every blog post they ever made on MySpace. Kate Cooper's singing and guitar playing has been particularly big influence on me. And by talking to Ian, I just wanted to know how it all happened, what went down, because I wasn't there for it. I missed it. Ian's lived in Melbourne for a while. He was in Brisbane at the time playing a show with his other band, No Anchor. And I got him into the studios at 4ZZZ. Well, not the studios, the training room rather, which is why there's a lot of traffic noise. And we sat down for a really, 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 really long interview. We recorded on a Saturday, and we were supposed to start and finish before my regular shift for my radio show Exit Stage Z. But we were going so long, and I had so many questions for Ian that at one point I actually paused the recording and went upstairs where my girlfriend at the time, Sam Kelly, who's also an announcer, was, and I got her to come down and fill in to do Exit Stage Z while I finished interviewing Ian. So he really had tremendous stamina in this interview, and he was a total treasure trove for an Iron On mega fan like me. So the way we're going to split this is the first part of this interview is going to deal with the Iron On story, and in the second part he talks about No Anchor and some more general music stuff. Ian is also an academic at RMIT, and he has many, 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 many opinions on the music industry. Just to let you know, this episode includes some talk about suicide, so if you don't want to hear that, this might not be the episode for you. It was a bit of a strange thing, having come to Iron On late and not kind of after the fact, after they've already released all their music and they've broken up. There are some things you can find out about this story, but especially with smaller bands that, don't have books written about them or anything, there are things that sometimes don't get talked about when you're doing your research. And in this conversation, I walked straight into something I probably should have known about but didn't, and was caught rather by surprise when I found out what had happened. I probably could have handled it better. I probably could have asked different questions or something, but by the time I kind of found myself suddenly a child talking about some very adult things with an adult. So apologies in advance if any part of this interview comes across as insensitive to anybody. All right, on to it. This is episode 35 of Gimme Empathy with Dr. Ian Rogers. All right, so
Yeah, let's do it.
Ian Rogers.
Yeah, we're recording. Oh, done.
What was your favourite song when you were 12 years old?
Probably Ring My Bell by Colette.
Colette.
Yeah.
Who are they? Who are Colette?
Colette was a pop artist from Australia, a very blonde, athletic woman who I think she may have also been on Neighbours. I'm not sure.
Oh, really? One of those Neighbours pop stars?
Yeah. No,
Nice.
I mean, I say that only because I can't really... that was the first record I ever physically sort of had in front of me, and I won it in a magazine. So I must have liked it, and it's pretty horrendous song, actually.
One of those like pop hits magazines?
It was Pop Hits.
Pop Hits. Is there I didn't even know there was a magazine called Smash Hits. That's the one. Yeah. Nice. Did your parents play a lot of music growing up? What sort of stuff were you into as a kid?
They did actually, but not a lot of music. But we always had music going. We often listen to music while we're eating dinner, which seems unusual now. And it was always a set number, a couple of records. The Hot August Night by Neil Diamond, which I still think is a good record. Who else? Don McLean's American Pie. Yeah. And maybe one or two other records that I can't really remember. But no, they weren't very musical. So
just that sort of 70s pop singer-songwriter stuff that a lot of people's parents were into.
And it's fairly shameful, even worse, is I suppose that they used to own a store and they only had those records because this was stock left over from when they owned this grocery store. So they're really not engaged with music much at all.
Yeah.
They're both a bit more interested now.
Do they like your music?
Not particularly. They like that I do it and that I get something out of it. They've also been concerned about it at certain points in my career / engagement, whatever your hobby. Yeah, they certainly wouldn't listen to it. I wouldn't be surprised if they probably listened to it like once in their entire life.
Yeah.
Yeah. They've seen me play once. In 10 years, yeah. So
in all the...
No, just once in total. They saw Iron play a show once.
So never seen No Anger?
No. Wow. I don't think they need to see that.
It looked like there was someone's parents there last night.
I think they were undercover police. and I'm not joking, I actually think they were. The venue was saying that there was some undercover police came in.
Really?
Yeah, for the first couple of songs. And
why?
Then, just to do a routine check on the venue. Yeah.
Wow, special branch all over again.
Yeah.
First week of the Abbott government, and this is what we get.
That's right.
So where did you grow up? Are you a Brizzy boy?
Yes. I grew up in Coopers Plains, which is a suburb fairly close ideologically and geographically to the Mansfield of violent Soho.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In Melbourne, are you living pretty close to everything? Or?
No, we're sort of back at... Well, for a long time... In Brisbane, I lived in New Farm, so I was really close. And because I grew up in the suburbs, and that was sort of only the beginning, I then moved to like even more isolated sort of places from the city. Like, so I also spent time in Victoria Point and Redland Bay and Park Ridge, so as far out, like a long way out. And I think a bit of that gets in your blood because at some point, even though I had this sort of pretty nice existence in New Farm, I did kind of miss the quiet of the suburbs. And so now I live in one of the outer suburbs of Melbourne's inner city. So it's called Preston. It's on the boundary of Thornbury and what's properly the outer suburbs of Melbourne. So it's quite nice. It's a bit far to travel to work every day, but it's quite pleasant too.
Did you enjoy school growing up? Were you good at it?
No, I hated school, like pretty typically, I suppose. Actually, no, people have different... I talk about some of these questions with other musicians in my work, and it can sway both ways. But yeah, I was fairly typical in that I disliked high school immensely, and I was not very gifted academically either, which is maybe something that I'm compensating for now, seeing that I work as an academic. But yeah, I had an AP of 11, which is about the middle of the absolute dead average that you could get, and then maybe a bit less actually. And I studied a very unusual set of subjects in that I took art and advanced mathematics together, and it kind of... I can remember at the end, apparently that was sort of landed me some pretty bad sort of grades. I just didn't particularly respond to it. It wasn't very interesting. Nothing I really looked at high school interested me a great deal. Like mathematics didn't really interest me. I just had I wasn't particularly good at it. It was just the sort of thing that I could I could get good at it. Like, I mean, it's the sort of thing where if you really, really try and you have a little bit of a knack for it, you can sort of go well at it. The only thing that I really liked was English, and even art was it was fun, but it was also a lot of work.
And so you didn't have like really many teachers that really engaged you that much?
Well, yeah, I had a mathematics teacher who called, I think it was Mr. Harms, Chris Harms. He's now a presenter on AFL, I think for one of the local, for ABC somewhere.
Not Chris Harms, the former editor of Rave.
No, not Chris, not that Chris Harms.
Right.
Yeah, he was pretty influential. But I'm a teacher myself, and yeah, there's certainly, like, you can really see the kids who don't fit, and you do make that sort of special if you're I suppose you've had that upbringing yourself. I often make a point of trying to, like, at least get to know that person a bit, and he was that he had that mentor role for me at school.
Yeah, he really tried to include you when it looked like you weren't engaging with it.
Yeah, or I think the more important thing is that he recognized the fact that I didn't fit in, and he kind of he sort of shared that with me because he didn't fit in at the school, and he was subsequently fired not long after either. So we were both kind of felt a bit like we didn't really belong where we did, and we didn't. You know, I was a working class kid at Redeemer Lutheran College, which is sort of elite private school, and he was the son of a pastor and a leftist. So that's probably where some of my politics comes from too, at this same toffee-nosed school.
Was that part of why he was fired did he have like crazy left-wing views on education?
Yeah, a part of that, I assume that had part of it. I think he also, I think the story was famously that one of the students that he'd befriended was not allowed into the final, I don't know, this is such a myth, but was not allowed into his final graduation because he'd dyed his hair pink at Schoolers Week. And that was the straw that broke the back. He just said, you got to let this kid come in and see his friends and finish high school. Yeah. And who cares what colour his hair is. And
he got fired for that?
Well, I think he quit, maybe.
Oh, okay.
He sort of
quit over that.
It's either let him in or I'm out. But I don't know whether that's true or not. That was just what the kids said at school. It's a good story.
So what kind of music were you into as a teenager?
I had a few different phases, like most teens. The pop thing didn't last long. I mean, that was just little kid stuff. In my early teens, I was really into hip-hop, and it was the golden era of hip-hop, so I was very behind the times anyway. So this would have been maybe the late 80s, and I was listening, or very early 90s, like 90 or the beginning of 91, I was listening to stuff like Public Enemy and Ice-T, Tribe Called Quest, and De La Soul, really.
So both West Coast and East Coast stuff.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I made the best, and the Beastie Boys, of course. Yeah, so the best hip hop. I still think some of those records are just unbelievably great.
Absolutely, like that. There's a run of 3 or 4 Public Enemy albums. They're just the best. Like the first 3 or 4, I reckon.
And a weird piece of trivia I always think is that this is this is sampling still completely in play.
Oh yeah.
And
before there were illegal ramifications, they just took whatever. Yeah.
And it was weird is later in life, everyone sort of circles back around to hip hop. I think if you've enjoyed it at one point, and it took me a long time to come around to the more minimal hip hop of the Wu-Tang Clan or something like that, because it isn't rammed full of Slayer riffs and all this stuff, because legally you just cannot physically, you can't make Paul's Boutique now. It would never make. It'd be like the Grey album, a Danger Mouse or something. But and that was a little while, and I suppose because I was young and about to go through puberty, the anger and the angst of that music really responded to me. I grew up, the most typical middle class, or working class, middle class, white background, Protestant parents and stuff. So the whole history of black music was, it was really interesting. I was kind of fascinated by it. As well, I sort of liked Metallica and Guns N' Roses, so I liked outside of white people's commercial rock as well. And then, of course, I was 15 years old when Nirvana's Nevermind came out. I don't know. If you were a kid like I was, I think you're sort of pretty much biologically ordained to want to listen to that record. It just seemed perfect.
And it's one of those records that's really it doesn't just belong to Generation X either. Like every subsequent generation discovers that album at age 15, and they all identify so much with it.
Absolutely. I think the great thing about it, it's good to hear that it keeps doing that, and I suspected it does, is that it wasn't very cool when it first came out. Like, I remember I listened to it, I loved it. The moment I heard it, I just kind of thought, this is Public Enemy, but for, like, dispossessed, like, white kids.
Like
you. Yeah, and it sort of just made me feel the same way, but it actually seemed to feel like it was, it's weird when you're a little kid and you're listening to Ice-T and Public Enemy because you've never seen a handgun. You've never been racially, abused or dispossessed in any way, so there's only so far you can go with your interest in that music. And then Nirvana sort of had its own. It's also a really abstract record, and that's how you feel, I think, when you're 15. You don't really know anything. You just kind of, you don't really know how you feel about anything, and that's sort of what that record really captures pretty well.
It's just an indistinct wash of anger and sarcasm and chorus pedals.
Yeah. And suspicion that things might not be about to get better.
Yeah.
And, so that was a big... I know, of course, all this is on cassette, so this is all coming to me through kids at school, the few friends I have at school giving me cassettes of this stuff, and then a girl in my art class gave me the Nirvana cassette, and then after that I was pretty fascinated about where this came from, and it was really just about trying to research it and work out. And
so you went back then through, like so many did, through Kurt's influences and all that stuff. Not so
well. It's strange. Again, I think because I'm from the suburbs, I immediately gravitated towards... I felt like Kurt, but I didn't really want to be him. Like, it was bad enough that I was him in my mind, my fantasy. So I was immediately more drawn to the more, heroic, bombastic bands from that time. So, the Smashing Pumpkins and Pearl Jam and Soundgarden. I liked all the uncool music from that time. And I still like... Pearl Jam, I'm sort of embarrassed to buy a little now, but... I do like the really silly stuff from that time a lot, still. Yeah,
but eventually you did. I guess, was it maybe when In Utero came out and Steve Albini entered the picture that you sort of got into his sort of side of the Nirvana influence?
Absolutely. You couldn't have said it better. I mean, that's it's weird. That's sort of like this untold story about Nirvana, is that they released this second record that when that record came out, they sort of, the marketing for it was pretty unusual. There was so much backlash about how it sounded before you heard it. We'd all read in the magazines, this is when you still read magazines, that they were in trouble with their record company, that this weird guy that you'd never heard of, who apparently had made all these records, these serrated noise records, had made the record. And then when it came out, and I liked the way it sounded better than Nevermind, that was just like a huge jump. I just went, how the hell did this happen? I want to hear more stuff like this. And then the weird thing is, there's just a whole universe of records that sound like that. That record is probably just, in my mind, that's just the most successful noise rock album of all time. But it absolutely sits in that genre. You can put it next to Jesus' album and it stands up really well.
And it just opened the door to so many other bands like that for people who would never have heard it otherwise.
Yeah, Albini's tentacles kind of reach out so far and so long that if he hasn't recorded the band or been in the band, he has talked about the band in interviews. So it's a good primer to get started. If you want to know your American underground 80s noise rock 101, I mean, that's the record to buy first.
That's ground zero of that. Yeah. So when did you start making music yourself?
Late, actually. Well, I played the piano as a kid, really young. And I think influentially I had an informal music teacher who didn't really teach me how to... we never had gradings or anything like that, so all I did is just went to practice every week. I ended up stopping that because I couldn't play anything that I liked, and because I was a precocious little kid. Plus, the piano is pretty boring as a kid.
It probably wouldn't have been cool in the early 90s.
It was not cool at all. It wasn't cool in the late 80s either, then, of course, when I'm 15, a couple of years later, 5 years later, I started getting into punk rock. I tell my parents, of course, that I want a guitar. And they just refuse outright because I've already fucked up the piano. Like, I've already sort of said, you know what, we bought the second-hand piano and you've done the lessons and you kind of like, you've done it. Yeah. Which is such a Protestant parent thing. You know, no, you've tried that. Let's not waste any more money on it. So when I was 19, by the time I was 19, I remember I had just enough money to buy a guitar, and my parents gave me like $50 or something for my 19th birthday. And I went out and bought a guitar that day.
What was it?
It was an Onyx Les Paul copy. I'm not sure why. I think maybe because Stone Gossard from Pearl Jam played one. Yeah, it was pretty disappointing because then you get it home and it's pretty hard to play.
Yeah.
I played an acoustic guitar at my first year at university. Someone had lent me that, so I'd learned a few bits and pieces. So yeah, around 17 I started playing the guitar.
And were you sort of self-taught on the guitar?
Yeah, just completely. Like, I had a friend who maybe showed me a few shapes. I had a book that I remember working out of. Yeah, as a teen too, I had a friend who from high school, like who he taught me how to detune the guitar, like to put it down to drop D. I mean, and then you can play everything in that, really. I mean, all that grunge music is in drop D.
It's all in drop D, yeah. How early did you start writing your own music?
Almost immediately, actually. It was really bad, but that Ramones thing where you can't play other people's music, so you have to sort of write your own.
But sometimes that's where you get some of the best ideas, when you can't replicate anything before you've had any theory drummed into you.
Yeah, totally. I didn't know how to write. It was only much later in life that I learned how to write a song, so to speak. Again, and we're just on that timeline, we're talking about, it'd be another 6 or 7 years before I actually appear on stage. I was in garage bands literally garage bands. We were playing friends' garages and stuff with my high school friends. Of course, they start to peter out around the end of university when people graduate and get real jobs and join touch football teams and, do that, put down music.
But you never had gigs with all those garage bands?
No, like played at parties, 1 or 2 parties and things like that. And just, they would just mix of covers and originals sort of stuff. So yeah, really not what a 19 or 18-year-old kid does now. It's completely different. Just completely clueless idea about how to conduct yourself as a musician. Like, no idea.
So like grunge and alt rock covers?
Yeah, we did. I still remember this stuff. One, because like strangely the music that we chose to cover was really cool. Like, even now I don't know how we stumbled up. Well, like, we did we did Fairy Park by Magic Dirt off their second EP. I still really love that record and that song in particular. We did a song called Lying in State by Superchunk, but it was by, was it the Spinanes or someone pretty good. Still a good song. That might have been it for covers, and then a couple of originals that all sounded like Superchunk.
Yeah.
At some point I got to Superchunk, and that was a bit of a breaking off point for me.
After school, you went to uni and studied economics. Did you have an idea of what you wanted to do with your life at that stage?
No, that's why you study economics at university, I think. Well, I had it was a business degree in property economics. So I did study a lot of economics, but I also studied property law. I studied property development. I studied to be a landlord and all these other things. And a basic business like marketing and accountancy, finance, all that sort of stuff. I did it at Gatton University because I had a shitty OP. Yeah, I did it because my parents sort of suggested it, really. I mean, I didn't really have any idea. I wanted to be a landscape architect. I don't know where that came from. And I remember that I applied to do it and didn't get into it. I applied for 5 different things and didn't get into it, and then the only thing I did get into was like that last choice, which was property economics at Gatton, which I would imagine that my father just went, just put it on there.
But you really felt like you had to go to uni after school?
Oh yeah. Well, my father had never completed his accountancy degree, and my mother didn't have the opportunity to go to university, so she completed high school later in life. So, as a child from an aspirant working class family trying to kind of bootstrap itself up a bit. That's a cliche for a reason. Like, it actually,
It's the done thing.
Yeah, it's how people really feel.
You go to uni and you get a job.
Yeah.
And you did work as a property valuer for a while.
Yeah, for 5 years.
Wow.
It's remarkable. Like half a decade, off and on. I retrained in my mid-20s as a academic. So yeah, it was boring. I can't really remember much from that time. I started work very young. I was 20. I remember having my 21st birthday, having to take the Monday off work, to recover from the party. It was an unusual experience. Again, I don't think it speaks tremendously well to my character that I don't really know what's going on with my life for like the first 8 years of my adulthood. Yeah.
But so eventually, you did get in a band that was Iron On the first band you were in that actually got gigs.
Yep.
So Ross Hope and Kate Cooper met at uni.
Mm-hmm.
But how did you come to join Iron On?
Through an ad, a bass player wanted ad, which was online. But yeah, this is pretty late 90s. No, early 2000s. And I can't remember where it was. I think it could have been Time Off Message Board. But it could, just as well as could have been on Mono, the precursor to Mesanoise, or something like that, or just some Brisbane band website that no longer exists. And yeah, it was a pretty straightforward ad, looking for a bass player that had some influences that I really didn't like, and then some stuff that I thought was really cool.
Oh yeah, what were they?
I can remember, Kate, I think Kate's pretty much on the record anyway as being a pretty big Super Jesus fan when she was younger. And I think Sandpit was on there though. A very kind of niche indie band from the 90s, and that immediately. I mean, I was just I still love that band and that everything about the record they made. And I think that was probably like one of those things on there that I went, oh wow, if they know who Sandpit are, then maybe this could be good. And this was right at the end of this 5 years working in the public service, and I'd accrued some gear by then. I had a garage and had a 4-track recorder and some guitars, and I'd bought a bass guitar to play along to some 4-track stuff.
Did you have your Rickenbacker at this point?
No, I just had a really cheap Fender P bass.
Oh yeah.
And I saw the ad and went, yeah, I should play. I want to play music with someone else and do it a bit more formally. Yeah, I just told them that I was a bass player, even though I probably only played the thing, a couple of times. Yeah.
So when you first went in to play with them, what were your first impressions of Ross and Kate?
Oh, I really liked them a lot. I mean, Kate is, is a very charismatic person. I mean, that's been part of her success, I think. And Ross, is, both of them are still close friends. Yeah, I loved it. I mean, I loved everything about it. I was sort of a bit lost in the world. I had this job that I hated, and they were still living this kind of university lifestyle, but in a city of Brisbane. I just thought it was really alluring and cool, and they seemed really cool. Like Kate had played in Brisbane bands before, so she was actually, I could go and see her on stage and things like that. Yeah, it was all pretty exciting.
Did you like the songs that they were writing? Did they live up to the influences in the ad?
Well, I'm not sure in the end, but at the time, I mean, there just seemed a lot to work with. Like, it was they seemed like they were going to be good straight away. Like, immediately some weird stuff was there in that, like, Ross could sing really well, and Kate could play guitar really, really well. And Kate also knew a lot about how to write songs and had taught Ross how to play guitar. And immediately they just seemed like really like something exciting might happen if I hung out. Plus, I was just happy to meet some new people. And
did they have a drummer at that point?
yeah, they had this drummer called Helen, and we used to practice at her house, and it's just down the road from the QUT Kelvin Grove campus. So I see the house quite often. Yeah, we'd just be in one of her back rooms.
And you went through quite a few drummers in the early years.
All women.
Yeah.
For no reason. Like
no particular reason.
No, it's one of the weird things.
So did they just have life stuff come up and they had to leave, or?
Yeah, oh my God. I mean, Helen's story, I don't know where Helen is now, but she was sort of a bit of a mess, a hot mess, if I remember correctly. I think she may have gotten in trouble at work, like serious trouble. like some sort of maybe petty crime style trouble, and she just disappeared. She was also in a marching band, and I could never work this out. And marching band always used to sort of take precedent to the band. Yeah, which was weird, but I think that she was involved with someone who was in the band and in the marching band. It was just all very... And then it got so bad that one day she got increasingly hard to get in contact with to go and practice at her house, and all that gear was there, of course. And then at one point, she just stopped responding to us, and I think they received a text message that all our stuff, come and get our stuff, and it was just all under the house, like kind of packed away. It was really weird. We saw her, I think we've seen her since, and, we can all kind of laugh about it now, but,
In the early days, Kate and Ross's songs have always sounded pretty distinct, like they each brought something really different to the band, like having two singer-songwriters. Did they actually collaborate much in their writing?
Yeah, especially early on they did. They would write songs together earlier on. Yeah, we often wrote together they would write songs, but they would get reshaped pretty heavily in the band room.
And did you have much of a creative input?
Yeah, I did actually. Over the years I've looked back, I'm not sure how positive my influence was, but yeah, to their credit, they really did, they listened to me when it came to structure and things like that. I had a much broader listening. I was older, I was 4 years older. I travelled, and I was a record nerd at that point because I had an income. So yeah, I did give them some records and things like that. So
what do you mean you're not sure if you were a good influence on the songs?
Yeah, there's times where, because it's a long time ago now, some of this stuff's 10 plus years ago, and I can hear my influence on certain things, and I'm not sure that it served the band all that well, at times, and that I was much more interested in abrasive, noisy sort of music, and Ross and Kay could have maybe been a much more successful pop band if it wasn't for me. But also they didn't need much encouraging, and yeah, things like that probably helped in some other ways as well. Again, they might say something completely different, if they were here.
So what kind of venues were you playing at when you first started with Iron On?
We did our first show at the Gabba Hotel with Rollo, who used to book a night, all the nights there, which was pretty much the punk venue. That's where you go and see Dick Nasty or hardcore bands. It's where I'd seen hardcore and metal and all sorts of stuff. So I don't quite remember how that came to be, but yeah, that was the first show. We played Rick's a lot earlier on. I remember we played Rick's 3 weekends out of 4 once. So we were kind of a weird house band for a little while. Played the Zoo because Ross and Kate worked there behind the bar, much to the annoyance of the local music community at times. We'd snaggle up some of those supports, only because we could. They had access to the blackboard at the back of the zoo where they could see who was coming. So they were. So
would they just write Iron On there, and then you'd be booked?
That was the assumption, of course. Our naysayers would be like, yeah, they just tell their boss they want the gig. Of course, that's not how it works. I mean, the industry is a bit more professional, slightly more professional than that. We would be able to contact the promoters much earlier than we knew that the show was coming, 2 weeks before it was announced, things like that. So, but also, generally speaking, we were kind of fairly nice, polite people. We weren't very raucous backstage, and we were fairly professional. So, and that's all really a touring promoter wants. They want the support band to bring some people along and not behave in a way that annoys the hell out of everyone. And that's it. That's all they want.
So in terms of other local bands that you really liked, I guess Scream Feeder were a pretty obvious influence.
Yeah,
mid-period Scream Feeder, you can sort of...
Yeah.
For this series, eventually I want to get Tim and Kelly on to do one, but and so I've been sort of listening to the albums chronologically, and I've just got up to the 4th one.
Rocks on the Soul? Or
the one after Fill Yourself With Music.
Is that Kitten Licks?
Kitten Licks, yeah. And listening to that, as soon as they started bringing Kelly in more to do those vocals, I could just hear Iron On instantly. It's oh, that's where that comes from.
Oh, absolutely. Scream Feeder were as big an influence on the band as Scream Feeder may have even been on that first ad too. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they were there at all. Yeah, they were by far the biggest influence on the band.
So what other local bands did you sort of hang out with and look up to?
Well, the first show that I ever booked was, we were given, Ross and Kate's employers at the zoo demanded that they play at the venue. At one point, they were sick of hearing the dishes and the bar people talk about their band and not ever seeing them. So they said, they literally went out to the chalkboard and wrote on August, on this Thursday night, Ross and Kate's band. And then Ross and Kate turned to me and went, what do we do now? And I'm like, I think we just, like, we've got something. You know, immediately my business brain from all this training says, well, we have something that people want now, because, you know, not everyone wants to play at the zoo if you've never done it before. So I went, and instead of just going out and asking like bands who I thought might say yes, I went and just asked the two bands that I loved the most, which was Turnpike and Dollar Bar. And they came and did the show, and I knew that we should open up too. I was like, yeah, so no one knows us, so we'll go on first, and then these two. And yeah, and Dollar Bar and Turnpike, we were kind of all joined at the hip for a little while.
Was that the show that was recorded and you put it out as, oh yeah, we're Iron On? There are 2 songs on that.
Yeah, possibly. Like, I'm not sure where that recording comes from. I think, yeah, I would imagine that. Gosh, it's weird that would was our 3rd show, I think. Yeah, but I suppose that's also, some of that recording's pretty tight.
Yeah, definitely.
So, oh yeah, we'd been in the practice room for a year before we did those shows, and we'd scrapped the whole set. So we'd written a whole set of songs, and then gradually replaced each one of them with a new one until we had sort of 5 or 10. We had most of the first EP immediately.
Was it long before you found yourself getting a bit of a following on the live scene?
No, we had it pretty good actually, like all things considered. Ross and Kate had friends. You know, they were going to university here in Brisbane, so you know they had a group of friends that they were pretty well connected with. And I mean, it's strange that a lot of these people are quite well known now. So people like Ben Law, Lorelei Vashti, Nadia Meisner, who later went on to do Ladyfest here in Brisbane and was also sort of involved in that industry down south. We could probably draw on, you know, maybe a dozen people who were kind of a lock who would come to shows just because we were playing them. Kate had also played in other bands, so there was a bit of I wouldn't say a crossover following, but people knew who she was. She knew little bits and pieces about who to tell. Like, I remember she knew to send something to Time Off, that they would publish it. You know, I thought that was really cool. And she knew Andrew Stafford, the writer of Pig City, and things like that. They were all pretty exotic, you know. I mean, they were all these nice-looking people that you would kind of want. You know, you want young, attractive people to come to a show when you're putting on nights that are sort of designed to be entertainment for like people in their 20s. It quickly got to the point where, we relaunched the EP in a year, like a year from when we first did that first show, maybe a bit more, 18 months. And I think we did about something reasonable, like 140 at the zoo. And that is not a lot, but I think that's pretty remarkable in some ways. Like, I don't know. I don't quite understand how that worked exactly, but maybe it was from doing the supports. We supported Sleater Kinney at the zoo very early. Like, we'd probably played like for a month or 2 before we did that. Yeah, and we did a string of early supports, and that helped as well.
So you had a demo EP that you recorded with John Patterson.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, wow. I haven't thought about that for a
shed?
while. Well, no, it was for a compilation.
Oh, for a compilation?
Yes, and we did it in a rehearsal room somewhere in the Redlands.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you know John?
I knew John through doing a radio show, I think, or living in the Redlands, and I did a show on Bay FM down there because that's how bored I was, and I assumed that I met John either Zombie Crime Boss coming in to talk on the show. I'm pretty sure that's what happened. Like to spruik because they do skate park gigs that Bay FM would have some sort of sponsorship with, and they used to play. I can remember seeing Zombie Crime Boss a few times at different skate parks around the Redlands. When I went later, I joined Einon, and we became a little bit more. We got our footing up here. I suppose we just kind of kept in contact, and when he decided that he was going to record a bunch of bands and put them on a compilation album, he just got in contact with me.
So was that just one song for the compilation?
It was 2.
2,
yeah.
Okay. Because there's a whole like demo EP that's like 4 songs.
Yeah, that's true.
Out there. Was that... So was that something you just sent out to venues and
Yeah.
stuff?
Yeah, they would have just come to Triple Z, and we probably sold them for $5 at shows. And all of that stuff and the stuff that's on the compilation, that's all that first set that got... Like, I don't think we probably ever... I'd be very surprised if we played any of those songs live more than like once or twice. Like, they were really quickly swept out of the set. Yeah, and even as we were recording them, we were probably pretty sure that they were like B material.
So going back to Bay FM, how'd you get that gig?
I have no idea. I think that I just went in there and volunteered. I think they may have put something in the local paper or something like that and said they were looking for people, or they were doing an intake. Or I may have even gone to a barbecue in the Bay FM car park for something else, and they were there. I was just curious about radio. And of course, it says so much that, even at 23, the idea of coming to Triple Z and doing a show, like that's for inner city people who know a lot about music, and punks, scary punks, I know I'll go and like do the punk rock show, strangely enough, at the old people station. It's like, yeah, it's weird, very unusual. It was also close to my house. The station house was very close to my house. So
Did you do it on your own?
I did it with a woman called Josie Hayward, who I'm still friends with. We may even meet up for a drink after this interview. And she was just another intake person who at the same time, and she liked contemporary music and things like that, and karaoke, strangely enough, I remember. We did the show together for a little while, and then unfortunately I moved into the city, and she I don't think she enjoyed doing the show without me, and she ended up sort of stopping. It's funny though, she later married a friend of mine, so yeah.
Brisbane.
Yeah, Brisbane. Yeah, and like I think, through knowing me through the show, and then sort of entering my little circle of friends, she met her late husband, and yeah.
So did you ever have any more community radio aspirations after that?
No, it kind of cured me pretty well. I do know a little about the dynamic of community radio. I'm not sure exactly how it works here in Triple Z, but Bay FM was sort of a viper's nest of ego and bureaucracy, and I didn't really have much interest after that. I also know how much work it is. It's really for people who have a lot of disposable, or not a lot of disposable, who have a real passion for it and want to use their leisure time to do this kind of volunteering. But the band really plugged that hole. Yeah, I really did go, I suppose, work, record collecting, into community radio, and then into the band.
So the demo EP was kind of rough, I guess, as you'd expect for a demo. But from then on, even from the first EP, everything sounded really, really polished. So the first EP being the understudy.
Yeah.
Where'd you record that one?
We recorded that with Bryce Moorhead, who has recently made the Violent Soho album, which sounds amazing. We knew him as the guy who recorded the Secondin EPs.
Okay.
Who quickly became friends with Saya and Simon and Mirko from Secondin. And Secondin were a big influence on Einon as well, because we never really had the Ramones. So we didn't... I can remember later in the band's career, we did Ramonathon. And I can remember us sort of playing it and sort of sheepishly going, this is like Secondin. Like, we hadn't put that together. And we had made a recording with, this is a strange story, with Nicola Morton, who is like known to some as Equalizer 24K, who is a really outrageous kind of performance artist now in Brisbane at the Griffith Conservatorium. And one of the songs is from that session with Nicola, and the other four are with Bryce. But this is while Bryce is still working out of his house in Coorparoo.
So was there an immediate reaction to the EP coming out? Did you get much radio play off it? Or?
Yeah, the EP... I think the EP, when I first heard the EP all together, that was the first time I actually had any inkling at all that the band was okay. Even that... Up until that point, I was not even really sure that we were writing songs or that this was just awful in every regard. But Ruddy, the first song off the EP, I still think that that's actually a pretty interesting piece of music. Yeah, and it did really well on Triple Z. Triple Z really played it a lot. I think it ended up placing well in the Hot 100 that year.
If you search the playlists, you find some of the earliest Iron On tracks from that first EP are still the ones that get played most on Triple Z. I found.
Good on you, Zeds. I really like the sound of that record in particular. Like, I think Bryce did a really good job with a few little details on there. So he was hungry too, I'd imagine. Like, he was hungry to make a good sounding record. And he was probably happy to be working with a band that had a drummer like we did, Nicola, who was a bit of a metronome. So,
yeah. So you had Nicola by this point.
Yeah, we'd gotten rid of Helen. Helen was on the demo, but then everything else is Nicola. So the stuff with John's Nicola, and I think it's Nicola. I can't really remember. I'm pretty sure it would be, though.
So with the radio play and the EP coming out and the bigger crowds, did you get a sense that there was some sort of groundswell of popularity that was growing, or did you still think you were kind of a cult item that it was just your mates coming to see you?
No, it definitely started to feel like it was becoming a legitimate kind of band. Like, it really, yeah. There were people I didn't know, like, coming to the shows, for sure. Well, I didn't know anyone. There were people Ross and Kate didn't know coming to the shows. And after you've played with a few bigger support bands and you don't totally embarrass yourself, I mean, it's pretty easy to sort of feel like you can do something else, or that it might go somewhere.
Were you guys very ambitious at the start?
I wasn't, but Ross and Kate were particularly ambitious, and I definitely, I mean, I'm not, in a way, I feel like that's what they gave me. I'm really happy in hindsight that I played with people who were that ambitious, because it's just not in my own character a great deal. Like, I'm 37 now, and there's been times in my life where I wish I was more ambitious as a person. And yeah, they were really, like, Kate Cooper is one of the only people I know who has always only really wanted to play music, has committed to it and sort of got it done. She has wanted to be Kate Cooper ever since I met her. And Ross's interest in music is really about music and songs. He's not really particularly interested in the community of musicians or anything like that.
He just wants the self satisfaction that comes with making music he likes.
He just wants to play the music that he wants to play. Which I suppose it's pure in its own way. I suppose that gets written out of this punk idea about what music is that people sort of assume that anyone who's in a pop band or a melodic band are somehow curtailing their creativity to the capitalist impulse to create something that's good for, like, radio and for industry and things like that. And it's much more complex than that.
Because there is an art to writing a great pop song itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even if you are never successful, some people can find fulfillment just in writing in that genre, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, and you have to remember that at the time, the music that we're playing it's not, we're playing indie rock right in the worst time to be doing it, because the 90s are over and Brisbane's new indie crop that's still like years away. But some of us were doing okay. I mean, Dollar Bar were on high rotation on Triple J. Sekiden were on high rotation on Triple J. Screamfeeder was still getting on high rotation. Like, it was a pretty buoyant. Yeah, it didn't feel like it was going to be impossible to get on Triple J and to maybe be a band that did something else.
But so what was the dominant musical genre you felt you and those bands were kind of fighting against at that time?
At the time, I really distinctly remember that a lot of people were experimenting with keyboards and this kind of electronic impulse was starting to come in. I suppose Electric Clash is having its first little thing there. And I love all that stuff now. But at the time, what I really wanted to do is I really wanted to play in an indie rock band like the stuff that I'd listened to when I was younger. So I felt like I could never really go out and see a band that sounded like Superchunk or the Archers of Loaf, or these sort of hardcore influenced pop bands, really.
And I guess there must have been enough other people in Brisbane who felt that way that you could get that crowd to come see you when you made music like that.
Yeah. Well, the live show was pretty dynamic as well. Like, I mean, you have to be broad in your appeal to sort of be even moderately successful in Brisbane, especially at that time. So Ross could sing really well, and Kate and Ross sang together really well, and Kate, was sang well too, and had a distinctive sort of persona, not persona, like the show was really engaging in that, we used to jump around, and again, at the time there was a coolness about music in that people would often just sort of stand there and drone away and things like that, which, I love all that too, but we were so unschooled about what was cool and what wasn't that we just wanted to rock, and I suppose people responded to it. But even our friends who were in cool bands were just kind of impressed by it, strangely.
So you ended up making your own cool.
We made our own uncool and just didn't care. It seemed to be working. People seemed to like what we were doing. Oh, people hated it too. That was the other thing that... and very quickly it became kind of precocious, the relationship with the Brisbane music community. It very quickly turned to not provocation so much as being quite happy with the fact that some people were incredibly displeased with what was happening.
So the people who didn't like what you were doing, what were they into? Were they into the electronic stuff, or
mainly because No, they were more, and the people who were really unhappy were people who were in rock and more garage rock bands and hardcore bands.
Oh, so they didn't like your pop aspect. Okay.
And strangely enough, because we were friends with Sekuden and very quickly Dick Nasty, we sort of often would play some of those shows. Because we didn't care. We actually just wanted to play as often as possible. We were really in love with playing live, and some people were unhappy about that. It's weird though, because I look back now and I just think, well, all the people who were kind of not happy about what the band was doing, it's not like they were ready to step up to do it. In my personal and critical opinion,
Was there some sort of controversy at some point with Iron On over something posted on the Time Off message boards? A big...
Numerous things. I dread to think that. I'm so glad that board is, that was me, without a doubt. Whatever it was, there was no doubt in my mind that was me. And because I used to love getting on that thing and seeing what was happening.
Trolling people?
Not so much. Getting trolled. Yeah, it was a big thing. I got taught how to use the internet by the Time Off message board. There was all sorts of stuff that I would definitely be, I wouldn't say embarrassed now, but it was pretty funny.
I guess the internet had been around for a while then as a tool for musicians to use, but then I guess would have been the start of the current explosion of communities getting together online. And communities being a divisive place with lots of differing opinions online.
Yep.
Do you think it's changed a lot since the days of forums and message boards now to social media?
Yeah, it would have to. That was the great thing about the Time Off message board, is that it was so... and that's where this negative criticism, of course, this is exactly what I'm talking about. I'm not... it's not like people are writing editorial letters to Time Off saying, I can't believe that Iron On are supporting whatever band that no one even remembers anymore. It's on the Time Off message board, and it was pretty vibrant, and I definitely met a lot of people. There's people I'd met who, if I went back and carefully looked at it, I probably met them on that board, and leaving the board was a big thing and things like that. So, in terms of social media and things like that, most people don't know anyone who voted differently to them on social media, in my opinion. So I can't see, it's not going to be as vibrant. But, you get a whole bunch of rock bands together in a city like Brisbane and they're going to hate one another sooner or later or do the wrong thing. There's going to be furors and...
It seems like, though, that these days the social circles where previously with message boards, everyone would be on the same board, whereas now with social media, you really choose who you tweet to or you're friends with on Facebook and that. And so it almost seems a bit more cliquey now.
Yes.
In terms of the bands and how they communicate and who gets what gigs and all that.
Yeah, I've written a little bit about this in terms of, what will happen now is you get a bad review, which is rare. Incredibly rare that anyone will get a bad review for anything. And then someone from the band will go to Facebook and say, I can't believe someone said this. And then there'll be 20 posts saying, they're wrong, you're right, everything you did is awesome. And that'll sort of be the end of the critical discourse. In Einon's day, I'd log on to that time off message board and I would have people adamantly telling me that my band sucks.
Yeah. Whereas now, like, the internet's the place you go to find people who agree with you,
Yeah.
rather than where you go to get abused.
Yeah. And I'm not actually, personally, like, I'm probably much happier living in my cocooned
Yeah.
cell.
Yeah.
Not having to deal with, I don't know, the Danger Man or Mikey or any of the other trolls from the old time off message board. Like, I got to know Mikey quite well in real life, and most people did. They had physical meetups where we'd all go to like a club and see each other.
And I'm sure it would have been a lot less abusive in real life when you.
Oh my God, none of it translated off the thing that I can see. There was occasionally, it's probably a bit more often that things would happen in real life, and that just happens, and then they discussed like in depth on the board. But yeah, I think it was pretty rare that anyone would ever say something on that board and then it would turn physical.
Yeah. All right, so in 2004, Iron released the second EP, Everybody Calm Down.
Yeah.
Who recorded this and where was that?
We went back to Bryce again. Zero Interference.
Yeah.
And we recorded it much faster in that we recorded 6 songs, I think, in the same time we did 4 last time. And we were generally unhappy with it. It's a lot of my friends' favourite Iron release, hands down. Like, people swear by it. I'm not overly fond of it myself. I think that it's the absolute apex of my influence, perhaps, in the band. And I think that it was good that we moderated that a little bit, in subsequently.
What do you mean exactly by your influence?
I'm not even sure how that record is absolutely the sort of record that I saw us making. There's bits of it I don't like. I don't like some of the vocal stuff that was done on there. I think that some of the vocals were rushed. I know that I can't remember why, but Ross and Kate weren't getting along while we were making the record in the studio. Yeah, the way that the songs that are on there, even things like what the songs are called or how long they are and how heavy and abrasive some of them are. It's the Iron EP that, is the only one that gives any inkling about what maybe No Anchor would sound like or has any kind of thematic tie whatsoever with
your other work.
Yeah, so, and I don't know why, I wasn't writing the songs. I wasn't telling everyone what to do or anything like that. I think it just sort of, I don't know, it was just a point where we got to that point. I can really remember Ross sort of saying that, he couldn't believe that we made an EP that didn't have anything that radio, like there's nothing on that thing that radio can play. Like, it just can't happen.
Yeah, it's not as... Yeah, there's no obvious pop hits like there were on the first one.
No, and the one song that could get played on the radio was like 54 equals 200, when no one's going to Richard Kingston's not going to play a song called that because it doesn't mean anything. It is really indicative, though, of a band, like by that point we'd played live a lot, and that's the sort of EP that you want to play live. Like, it was really bombastic and fun and noisy.
So you mentioned that Kate and Ross weren't getting along at that time. Generally, did they get on well? And what was their, as a band with 2 front people and 2 singer-songwriters, how did that generally gel well, or was there much conflict between them?
Oh, well, their relationship is kind of the core of the band, really. I mean, they lived together as roommates, like at Roost Street, which is where the name of the record label came from. Oh. So their friendship had its ups and downs because they put a lot of pressure on it because they virtually did everything together. They lived together. They went to band practice together. When Ross would be sitting in his room playing the guitar, Kate would be sitting in her room playing the guitar. Like, it was really, really close, but any really close relationship is going to get a bit wild. You throw music in the mix, it's always going to be a mess. Any relationship with music involves, going to be a mess at some point.
So the EP came out. I guess it didn't do as well on radio as the first one?
Yeah, I think it did all right. I think what it didn't do is it didn't capitalize on the expectations of the first one. Like, radio didn't play it. Triple J didn't want it. By this point, we were already starting to tour nationally. So we're going up and down the coast, playing shows. And just that second EP, people just didn't really they just didn't seem to love it. Like we put it out and no one really responded like they did with the first EP. And we got the feeling that people may not have liked it, which I've since known is kind of just what happens with the second record. It's
regardless of what you do.
Yeah, it's just people are not quite as excited. They're excited by the first thing, and then they're excited by when you get good, and that's about it.
So your first album came out in 2005. It sounds quite different to the first two EPs.
Yep.
It's absolutely loaded with pop hits. It was recorded at great expense with Magoo out at Applewood. Was this a really conscious effort for you guys to make a successful pop record?
I think so. It was recorded at Black Box, not at Applewood.
Oh, Black Box, sorry.
So in just here. Was that over near the river? I suppose the thinking was that we really needed to make. It's the record we wanted to make. Like if we could have, we would have made the first two records sound like that. We wanted to sound big. That was the other thing. Like I just knew, and everyone unanimously agreed that all this music that we loved, a lot of it had this big sound that we just couldn't get with Bryce. The EP, the second EP, Everybody Calm Down, that we made with Bryce is actually doesn't sound quite as hi-fi as the first one. So we're kind of feeling like maybe we need to go somewhere else for this third record. And I'm not sure how it came about. I know that I loved Magoo's work. We all did, actually. He'd worked with Regurgitator, Jebediah. I really loved the work he did with Bud, this Brisbane noise rock band, of course. He did. The first meeting we had with him, I asked him about the Bud EP, and he didn't even really remember how it was made or anything about it. But we had a meeting with him. I suppose we were audacious enough to go, well, we would maybe like to make a record with this guy. And we sent him an email probably and said, how much does this cost? Is this... And we met him at the Bowery, and he was just really cool. Like, he just sort of said, oh, look, I've listened to you. I know who you guys are. I think, I'd be... Oh, he also worked with Jeff Lovejoy, and Jeff Lovejoy had worked with Kate previously, so that's probably how this came together. But he was just really chilled about how it was all going to work, and he told us to write a grant and get some money so that we could make the record. And if the grant didn't happen, we had a bit of money from a touring grant and some money we'd saved up. He said, we'll just piece it together, but let's do it. And it was just really encouraging. Like, it was just, this guy had made Unit by Regurgitator, and we had a bunch of songs by that point, and he came to rehearsal once and listened to them and was pretty happy about what was going to happen.
Did he have much input in the arrangements or anything?
Yeah, in the studio, some of the best flourishes from that record are stuff that Magoo has suggested.
And there are a lot of really cool pop flourishes on it.
He's amazing. I've written about that record and how expensive it was, and how that was actually a unsustainable record to make for a band at that point.
Did you get that grant in the end?
No, we didn't get the grant. We actually ended up piecing that. The show money, we'd released the first two EPs ourselves, so they had recouped, we sold 500 CDs of both of them. So we had about $12,000 and put $1,000 in each. But yeah, he did a lot of great work on that. And I miss having a producer now, because I don't work with producers anymore. And just seeing what he did in the studio was cool. He did things like change the key of one song and made it into a pop song. Reckless Pronto was completely in another key, and he just immediately went, you know what, if Kate sings it in this key, you put capos on, it'll make her voice sort of sound more buoyant, and we'll turn this from a rock song into a more upbeat pop song. And, I still love that song. So.
And that 1-2 punch, the Learn Today, Earn Tomorrow, and Reckless Pronto is still an amazing opening combo, I reckon. Yeah,
well, and he puts the hand claps, of course.
Yeah.
In thing, and wrote, sort of has a big part of the chorus. So the chorus has got this real stunted thing, and he sort of said to do that. We just played it straight like a chord progression. He's like, you got to make it do something in the chorus. So that's the granular level that he gets down to. We had a month to make the record too.
So it was a good experience?
Yeah, really good. I mean, it got long for me. I don't really like being in the studio, but yes, I had a great time.
And so did you get much of a reaction from the album when it came out?
Yeah, it was great. I mean, the critical reaction was really great. In terms of it, At the time, like I think I don't listen to much of my work at all, but I think at the time that record was a bit undeniable in that it came out, and even if there were people who hated the band who thought that it was a good record, or that it sounded good at least, and I think people were genuinely surprised that we'd done it.
So did you get much more radio interest off it?
No, this becomes the eternal. Well, one of the big problems with Iron is that Triple J virtually ignored the record. I didn't play it. I don't think they played. They may have played Learn Today and Tomorrow once and Reckless Pronto once. So the typical, they just, yeah. And we were touring at this point. We're touring like 2 or 3 times a year. We went to Canada on the record, and we just were not able to. Triple J just were not interested in
Why
this.
do you think that is?
We had all the infrastructure behind the band was wrong at that point. This is before Unearthed, really. Well, Unearthed is happening, but it's before unearthed.com or whatever that thing is. It's no sort of real pathway from being a full-on indie band where you've got no management to speak of, and you're on an indie label that's not really operating like Modular, like another big indie, to get onto Triple J. But we didn't have a publicist.
So you're doing everything yourself in terms of booking and promos and press
No,
releases?
at this point we're signed. We never really signed anything, but we're in a relationship with Plus One Records, run by Simon Homer. It's a good label at this point in time. It's got Intercooler, who's had some success with Triple J, and the Giants of Science, who are doing very well at that point, and the Gin Club, who are doing very well. So it looks pretty good. And Steve Bell, who is now the editor of Time Off, is managing us or helping out briefly around this time as well. We're not really booking. I'm not booking anything for the first time, which is good. Yeah, but there's no publicity to speak of, and the industry engagement doesn't really happen outside of Brisbane, so we can get the supports here. But until Tegan and Sarah come along and help Kate, like meet Kate at Skinny's, and they take us on tour, that there's nothing happening. But even then, we're on this big national tour with a huge pop band, and Triple J just seems profoundly disinterested in playing the record. So,
do you think any of that was personal, just personalities at Triple J who didn't like you for whatever reason?
It seemed like a bit of a bad time in Brisbane. It seems like I can remember at the time that this is after Dollar Bar. There was just not a lot of guitar-based music that seemed to really be getting. I suppose the Giants were doing okay. They were getting on the radio. Yeah, I've never really been able to work out. Obviously, the presentation to industry alerted them to something. They made them unsure because, to get on Triple J, you really need to be able to tell them the story about how you're going to become successful. I mean, that's what they respond to. And something about what we were doing, didn't seem to indicate that. And it was probably correct because, the band didn't end up being successful.
So go back to where Tegan and Sarah met Kate. So she was working at Skinny's.
Yes.
And they came in. Did they do an in-store there, or were they just...
They might have done a signing.
A signing?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you got the national support off that?
Yes.
And were you supporting them in Canada as well, or was that your own tour?
No, we just, that was our own thing through Plus One.
You were nominated for Favourite New International Artist at the Canadian Independent Music Awards in 2006. Was that just based solely off that one tour?
That was based solely off the record.
Off the record?
This is before we went to the award ceremony when we went on the tour. And it wasn't a thing. This is literally a bunch of people standing around in a room, not even seated or anything, and getting drunk. And famously, Ross was in the toilet when the award was called. He's in there, and they came out. He's like, "What's going on?" And we're like, "Oh, we didn't win that thing." He's like, And I don't know what that is. That's some industry thing that I don't really understand why.
How did you get picked up over in Canada?
I have no idea. Simon Homer, probably from Plus One, probably sent the records to someone. He was probably doing a bit of that early. When you go to the tour of Canada, I'm using air quotes here, was about 4 shows, and 2 of them would have been attached to the Canadian Music Week conference. I can't remember what that's called. And he would have been doing his pre-planning for that conference and sending out the records and things like that, and that's maybe how it ended up.
Did you have a good time on that tour?
Yeah, pretty good. It was long, 3 weeks and not many shows. which is not a good thing for a band on the road
Yeah.
because you can find yourself in all sorts of fun situations. You get pretty sick of each other when you're not working. I enjoyed it a lot though, because at this point Einon had toured quite a bit, and I found it really refreshing to go on the road with other people. Just be able to have other conversations and things like that. It was really good.
Was there much tension in the band when you did go on tour that can test anyone's relationships, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I because I'm friends with Ross and Kate and Marisa, of course.
Oh, yeah, Marisa would have been.
Yeah, and
by
Marisa
this
comes
point.
on board. Marisa didn't record Oh the Romance, but she played every performance that happened after the record came out. She plays on, and yeah, I love them all, but they used to annoy the piss out of me on tour. I mean, they were so high energy and so I don't know. They can be tremendously annoying when they wanted to be, and also I, of course, am the pivot. No, that's not the wrong word. I'm the guy that's standing between kind of what they want and what's actually happening, because I've booked the shows, I've booked the tour, I've booked the support bands and the accommodation and things like that. I'm sort of doing the tour managing and sort of de facto manager of some description, though I'm not managing anything. So I'm the tour manager and booker, really. And yeah, so when the show goes terribly wrong in Melbourne, as it did pretty much every second time we ever went and did one, you know, I'm kind of the bad guy. And I just found that a bit taxing after a couple of years. And then we go on the tour to Canada, and I don't have to do anything except for hang out with, 20 other people. I thought it was great.
So Marisa joined after Oh the Romance.
Mm-hmm.
What happened to Nicola?
Nicola's a sad story, of course, and it's pretty much on the record. So, and I don't mind talking about it at all. So Nicola killed herself after we kicked her out of the band. And yeah, it was a pretty terrible time, really. And it's when someone kills themselves, it's always pretty complicated, actually. Like, it's not, rational people don't tend to kill themselves. I mean, that's just sort of how it is. It's also a very common place sort of thing. That's what you realize when the first person in your life does take their own life, is that you then pretty much meet everyone. It's a way of talking about when that happens. So many people say, oh yeah, this person in my life killed themselves. It's like really, really quite common. Kills more people, I think, under the age of 25 than motor vehicle accidents and things like that. So
yeah, it seems like a thing that it's not publicized a lot, perhaps to stop people thinking about it.
Yeah,
being the idea.
Absolutely. And this is not, of course, to take away the importance of what Nicola did. But yeah, it was a very unusual situation. She was a very troubled person, very hard, difficult person to deal with in the band. And she really did. We did have to get rid of her from the band for reasons that I won't talk about really exactly why we kicked her out of the band, though. Yeah, it was kind of money related, and also just her general vibe. She was quite an intense, difficult person to get along with. She also lived a very, very itinerant lifestyle, in that she would often live in our practice space or like kind of bounce around on couches. She was on the run, technically, from her family. I know this very unusual story about this person who ends up with these 3 other stupid geeks, really. Yeah, and so we kind of had to, I had to kick her out. We discussed it, of course. We kicked her out of the band, and then about a month later, she took her own life.
That must have been a really hard thing for you three to go
Hands
through.
down, it's like the single worst thing that's ever happened to me. And I'm still really hate her, I have to be honest, for doing what she did. I think I haven't really ever been able to forgive her. We were quite close, her and I, and, well, we were all quite close, but her and I, she would often stay at my house before and after tour, and, she would crash at my place pretty often, and she was very good friends with other people who I was friends with as well. Yeah, so I've always been pretty unhappy with her. It seemed like a very selfish thing to do beyond you know, yeah, I don't think she really thought it through. No one who kills themselves probably does, but she definitely didn't, you know, do the right thing by me, or her family, or her friends. But that's just the way it kind of works, unfortunately.
So Marisa was your next and final drummer. So how did you get her in the band?
Yeah, well, I'm still friends with Marisa. Marisa's lives in Melbourne now with me, and we see each other quite often. And poor Marisa has one of the worst experiences, I think, maybe in Australian rock and roll, in that she joins this band that has just kicked out its drummer. Her drummer is a very accomplished musician. They've just made this big record that they've been working for the last 5 years on to sort of get to. Very shortly after joining the band, Nicola kills herself. And so she is literally, you know, this has got to be the worst situation to be in, I think, as a musician. That, you know, but we found her through through an ad. I think we put ads up that, you know, we wanted someone, and yeah, she fit the bill. There was a couple of other drummers that we tried and they were okay too, but there's just something about her personally that seemed to work. I think it was also obscure randomly that, you know, we'd had 2 female drummers before that point. And I can remember Kate saying explicitly, no more female drummers. Like, just because we just wanted, I don't know, it was kind of funny like that we would say that. But yeah, we'd all thought that, yeah, that's it, no more. Yeah, no, but Marisa was pretty easy to deal with. I mean, again, she ended up in Einon, and we used to always joke that Einon was pretty dysfunctional, that anyone who was kind of needed to work through something kind of ended up in the band. So, yeah, she was great, you know. And she ended up being a really good drummer as well. Like, the material that we wrote after Oh the Romance with her is by far some of my favourite stuff that we did.
Oh the Romance came out in 2005. You did the Canada tour. Were you still getting lots of national supports and touring a lot in Australia as well?
There's definitely a lull at some point. We sort of fall into inactivity, and I'm not sure why that is. We don't tour for a year. It could be writing the follow-up stuff from Oh the Romance. Yeah, well, and that's also, it's really difficult. I mean, in this time that Oh the Romance comes out, Nicola dies, the record doesn't get picked up by Triple J or do anything to really further us as a band. Like, it probably added like 50 people to our live show in Brisbane, and that's about it. And we still don't really have much else. Our label, I've got to be careful about what I say about our label because Simon is a friend, but the record didn't really perform that well. I think it sold okay, but there wasn't much income coming back in to reinvest into a new record or anything like that. And yeah, that's right. Around this time, at the end of that album cycle, I suppose you'd call it, the band played an industry showcase at one of the first early Big Sounds and attracted the management of Kath Harraday, who was the manager at that time of Eskimo Joe and someone else. And for about 6 months, she probably managed us. And in that time, she did absolutely nothing. Like, virtually didn't really even return our calls all that often. We couldn't actually work out if she was our manager. It was very unusual. She flew up to meet us. She saw the show and said, look, I love it. I want in really bad. And then we said, okay. And she said, I'll come up to Brisbane sometime soon, really soon, and we'll talk. I'll come and see you guys play in the practice room, and I just want to get to know you guys. And she stayed with Kate and Marisa, who were living together at this point. And then she just didn't do anything at all. Like, that's still a mystery to me as to what ever happened.
You toured with Eskimo Joe at some point. Was that around this time or was that earlier?
Yeah, like after that, eventually we fired her. Like, if we were ever employing her, I don't know. You know, she obviously didn't make any money off us or anything like that. We were just always having these conversations about what we'd do, and she would always say to us, go away and keep writing. And we're like, well, we kind of have the best part of like another EP/record, you know, and it would all seem pretty good to us. And we wanted to tour. And I think her idea was that she would get solicit interest from industry, and then we would go on tour with funding and so forth. But that to us seemed a bit like starting the band again. You know, we couldn't wait 2 years for her to get all this in order, and she didn't seem to have much of an idea about how to operate independently at this point. Yeah, and so eventually we just sort of had to ring her up and say, well, what's going on? And I think Kate and Marisa went down and visited her, and she just said that she was too busy to do it or something strange. And this all took the massive amount of momentum. You know, this after Nicola and after the record failing, it's like, you know, it's just a nightmare. And so we kind of just struggle on to the last EP and record it because we're on autopilot a bit. And also because Marisa hasn't, after living through all this bullshit, has not actually played on an Iron record. Poor Marisa.
And so eventually you did record your final EP, The Verse, which came out in 2007.
Yes.
It's a bit of a mixture of stuff that was recorded in a few different places.
Yep.
There's some acoustic stuff. It feels a bit like a compilation rather than a cohesive thing. Was it supposed to be the start of a second album? Or?
It was supposed to be the thing that we put out before to get us in the get us back out there before we make the next move, which would have been an album. And I'd imagine that some of the songs on the EP would have been on the album, especially the acoustic ones, because they were all band arrangements that we'd dice down to acoustic. At this point, Ross Hope his girlfriend is Megan Reeder, who works at Due Process and is a publicist, and she has agreed to help us publicize the EP and to help us, and she's sort of mentoring us, telling us a bit how the industry works and things like that. And well, I found it tremendously helpful and interesting. And so we made the EP, I think, with the idea that with Meg's help, we might actually be able to do this thing that we've never been able to do before, which is act a bit more professionally in the eyes of the music people. And of course, we do those Eskimo Joe shows because Kath Harraday knows, even though that's all over, she sort of says, come and do those shows. And I should say, for the record, I voted that we not do them and almost refused to do them. And then this is a great example of how I am as much of a menace as a positive in the band. And then we do them, and then that was some of the most fun shows we ever did with the band.
Why were you opposed to doing them?
Because I hated Eskimo Joe. And I disliked Kath Harraday at this point as well, because I felt like she'd done the wrong thing by us. And yeah, I was like, yuck, I don't want to do this thing for this person that's just stuffed me around with this band that I think are just awful on every level. And yet, you know, their road crew was lovely and the shows were sold out. I was with Little Birdie as well. I mean, this has got to be one of the worst lineups in Australian rock history, right? Little Birdie and Eskimo Joe, what a fuck house. That's just... Anyway, that was so much fun, and yeah, that was great. I'm trying to think, what was the question? Damn. Oh yeah, why do we make the EP? And so we make the EP because we had the songs too. We had the first two songs. I can't remember what they're called. One Man Band.
And The Red Thread, was that on that one?
The Red Thread's not on there. It's
no, that was on Cam's compilation.
Yeah.
Terrible Year.
Terrible Year's on there. I can't remember Ross's song is on the EP, but anyway, we kind of put the thing out. We had the songs that we thought would work, and yeah, and strangely enough, it kind of did work. I mean, this EP came out, and because we had a little bit of a budget to spend on a publicist, which is Meg, it got on to rotation on Triple J. But by this point, of course, it's too late, and the band's completely out of steam. And we go on one or two more tours, and it's just feeling pretty grim.
So personally, were you all just not enjoying being in the band anymore?
Yeah, just exhausted. We practiced twice a week for the entire history of the band. So that's a lot. And yeah, we were all pretty sick of it. There was also nothing to do, right? I can remember at the time I told my girlfriend that this tour we're going on is the last bonfire. That's what I'd said. Because that's what it was. It was like putting all the cash that we have on the table, and it didn't really kind of work. And that was the end, really. It wasn't the end. It just, that's where it sat until everything changed.
So at what point did you guys really sit down and say, all right, this is it, it's over?
When Kate got offered the tour with Tegan and Sarah in the US for Ann Horse.
Yeah.
She rang each of us individually and said, look, I've just been offered this tour. Ross and Kate both did a solo EP for a friend's little DIY handmade CDR label.
With the guys from the Rational Academy.
Yeah, they did one. Ben did one as well. And, and Kate did Ann Horse. Like, so that's sort of the first Ann Horse one. And Ross did Ross. And I suppose, yeah, Kate must have been playing 1 or 2 shows occasionally as Ann Horse at this point.
Acoustic. I think there's one like the Powerhouse or something. She was doing some home demoing at this point with stuff that was sounding a bit more electronic almost.
Yeah, she'd always done scratchy garage band demos. Actually, everyone in the band did that sort of stuff. Well, Ross and Kate did it. And she worked with Damon Cox, her drummer at Skinnies. And I think that, you know, towards the end of I-9, she may have done like 1 or 2 shows as Ann Horse and with Damon, and then had decided that she would go into the studio and just kind of knock out like a demo or something like that.
And she recorded the first EP with Magoo, didn't she?
Yeah. And obviously, I think she gave that to Tegan and Sarah, which is a smart thing to do. I mean, that's what you do when you make demos, you give them to people. And they offered her the tour. Yeah, I don't think anyone begrudges Kate for doing what she did, but just to maybe take a little bit of the negativity off the thing is, for years Kate had been telling us that she wanted to tour abroad and that I-9 should go abroad and that Tegan and Sarah would help us and had said as much. But at this point, I didn't want to book an American tour. Like, as you could probably gather by reading between the lines, I'm starting to find the I-9 tours that we're doing already a little bit taxing personally, and the idea of then having to sort of be the guy that explains to everyone why the American tour fails, I was like, this just sounds like shit. I don't want to do it. It's going to be expensive, difficult. Have a girlfriend here, have a job here.
So when Kate did call you to say she was going to tour with Tegan and Sarah, what was your reaction?
I was happy for her, really. It was a bit, up and down, really. I can remember I told her that I was really happy that she was doing it and that, that she didn't need to worry about my feelings about it. But then that she should go ahead and do it. And we had a nice conversation about it. We were pretty good friends still. Like, we were seeing each other all the time. Like, the band was still practicing twice a week. Yeah, and that was about it. But I remember when I put the phone down, I said to Claire, my girlfriend, who was Kate's best friend. So you can see that I'm not getting away from any of these people anytime soon. They're kind of my family. That, I told her, and Claire's like, oh, that's great. She's always wanted to do that. And I kind of just was like, I can remember saying, but I wanted to do it as well. But that's about it. That was the extent of it. I just wanted to do it. I didn't actually want to organise it or have to do any of the kind of work. So I was envious more than jealous, I suppose, is the way to...
And how did Ross and Marisa react?
Not well. And I don't think I don't want to talk out of school. I mean, you're probably better to ask them that question, but this would have definitely sort of been the more formal end to Ross and Kate's creative friendship because, they'd started this band together, they'd worked on it together, they had to, had to sing together, do everything together, and now Kate is going off to the US to do her solo project without Ross, and that it was definitely the point where literally everything stopped, without question. It just... band practice the next week just didn't happen, and then it just never ever happened. In fact, the 4 of us have never actually played music in a room together since that phone call.
Did Ross and Kate's personal relationship suffer after that?
Yeah, it did. I don't think I'm not really feel like I'm telling anyone anything true. Of course it did. It could not. And it didn't. I'm not sure how close they are now, because I'm friends with everyone a bit individually, and I haven't really talked to Ross about that for a while. Actually, Ross lives he's happily married now, and still lives here in Brisbane, and did other things with music after I-9. And Kate is abroad, and I talk to her often. Unfortunately, either email or through my girlfriend. So, but again, we've all been out to dinner together a couple of times since all this has happened, and it doesn't feel tremendously awkward to me. So
there you go. That's part 1 of my chat with Ian Rogers, the history of Iron On as told by the bass player. Iron On's entire discography is up online on Bandcamp if you want to listen, and their album Oh the Romance in particular is essentially flawless. You should go listen to it. It's totally fantastic. In the second part of the interview, we talk about No Anchor, the decidedly less poppy band that Ian went on to join. Kate Cooper's side project and Horse grew into something much more commercially successful than Iron On ever was, and they've released 2 albums before going on a long hiatus, and they've recently released a new single and have been touring across North America, so hopefully they'll be back with some more new stuff soon. Kate also had a solo pop project called Cooper that I'm actually really interested about. I really want to know how... It's kind of an odd, like, when I say it's poppy, it's not poppy the way Iron On was. That was like an indie rock band. This is like actual pop. And I wish I knew the backstory of how that happened. But Kate lives in North America, and there's not a lot of information about that album. So we may never find out. Ross Hope went on to start a new project called DiscoNet that released one album called Running Red Lights. But he quit music altogether in the end. He moved out of Brisbane and started a family with his partner. If you want to get in touch, you can email me at gimmeempathypodcast@gmail.com or on Facebook or Instagram at gimmeempathypodcast. Oh, hey, I think it's time for another helpful hint section. I haven't done that in about 20 episodes because something happened in between the time I recorded the intro for this episode and the outro. It's a cold night here in Brisbane, which I guess is relative, but it's cold for me. So I went to make a hot water bottle. So I put the kettle on, boiled some water, put it in the hot water bottle, and put it under the covers at the foot of my bed. So when I go to bed later, it'll be nice and warm for me. And I know what you're going to say. Scott, what is this, amateur hour? Everyone knows to do that. You put the hot water bottle in to warm up the bed for a little while before you actually go to bed. But, and in much the way that penicillin was discovered growing at the bottom of a moldy boot or whatever, when I went in later to put on my pajamas, they had been laying on top of the foot of the bed. So they were a little bit warm. So from now on, what I'm going to do is make my hot water bottle, put it under the covers at the foot of the bed, and like wrap my pajamas around it so they will also be nice and warm when I go and change into them. So you're welcome. And until next week, stay warm. I know I will from now on. Peace.